Okay, so welcome back, everyone. You know how we love to dig into the weird and interesting stuff online? Well, buckle up because today we're diving deep into something that's been bugging me.
Oh, yeah. Lay it on me. What's got you all riled up?
You know how sometimes you're scrolling through YouTube or whatever, and you see these crazy stories, these like over-the-top experiences?
Uh-huh. I feel you. Like, did that really happen? Kind of stuff.
Exactly. And it's like, why? Why do people feel the need to like fabricate or exaggerate their experiences online? Is it all just for clicks and views?
It's a really good question, actually, and it's more relevant than ever because think about it. We rely on online information for so much these days, right?
Right, totally.
So if we're constantly being bombarded with, maybe not entirely true stories, how do we even know what to believe anymore? It kind of makes you question everything you see online.
It really does. And that's what we're going to try to untangle today. Luckily, we've got this research here. It's an excerpt from a text that digs into like the psychology of it all, especially on YouTube.
Ooh, juicy. Okay, let's hear it.
All right, so the first thing it talks about is this whole like attention thing, right?
Right.
Like sensationalized stories, they just suck you in. It's like a magnet. You know, those clickbait thumbnails, those dramatic titles.
Oh, tell me about it. I've fallen for my fair share of those.
Oh yeah, me too.
Hmm.
So this research, it says our brains are kind of wired to seek out that kind of stuff. Like we crave novelty and stimulation.
Makes sense. It's like the more shocking or, the wilder the story, the more we want to know, right?
Eh,
Right?
And it triggers this like dopamine rush in our brains.
Ah, the good old dopamine hit.
But then you got to think about the people making this content. It's not just a hobby for a lot of them, it's their job.
Right. And a lot of platforms like YouTube, they reward creators based on engagement, views, comments, all that jazz. So you can see how the pressure builds.
Oh, for sure. More views equals more money. So it's like even a tiny exaggeration, it might seem worth it in the end.
And then you throw in the algorithms, those things that are supposed to show us what we like. Yeah.
Well, they often end up boosting this kind of exaggerated content
Hmm.
because it gets more clicks, which feeds the whole cycle.
So it's like we're all kind of playing into it in a way.
Yeah, it's a weird tangled web, isn't it? But hey, at least we're talking about it. Awareness is a good first step, right? The more we understand how this whole thing works, the better we can spot it.
Absolutely. Okay, so that's the attention piece. But then there's this whole other layer, right? The whole idea of online personas.
Ooh, yeah, that's a good one. It's like everyone online is playing a character, right?
Oh, yeah.
They're showing us this like curated version of themselves.
Yeah. And it makes sense to a point. You want to put your best foot forward online. But this research, it talks about how people, like especially influencers, they craft these super specific images.
Oh, totally. You know, like the adventurous foodie or the always hustling entrepreneur. It's like they're building a brand. Exactly. And these personas, they can be super appealing to their audience.
Hmm.
But it makes you wonder, like, where's the line between presenting your best self and like straight up fabrication? Does this research talk about that?
It does, yeah. It brings up those ethical questions like, is it okay to build an online persona that's not totally, real?
Right, because at what point does it become like misleading?
Right. It argues that it's one thing to like, put on a nice outfit for a photo, but it's another to completely invent a personality.
Yeah, I get that. It's that whole authenticity thing that everyone's always talking about online.
Yeah.
But speaking of pressure, isn't this whole persona thing also fueled by how competitive social media is?
Oh, 100%. It's like everyone's trying to outdo each other with their, perfect lives and amazing experiences.
Right. It's like this crazy online arms race of like who can be the most interesting, the most successful, the most whatever.
Exactly. And it creates this environment where people feel like they constantly have to like top their last post.
And that's where the exaggeration comes in. So it's not just about individual people wanting attention. It's also like the very structure of these platforms. They kind of push people in that direction.
Yeah, it's a fascinating dynamic for sure. A little scary, but fascinating.
Totally agree. Okay, so we've talked about attention. We've talked about personas. But there's another angle to this, right? Sometimes it seems like the fabrication is less about clicks and more about, well, money.
Oh, yeah, the money trail. It's always there somewhere, isn't it?
Right. Like those like get rich quick schemes or those products that promise like miracle results.
Oh, I see what you mean. This research, it talks about how exaggeration is basically a sales tactic, and it's everywhere online.
That's crazy. And people fall for it.
Well, think about it. These ads, they're designed to exploit our hopes and fears. They
Mm.
promise us solutions to our
And
problems.
a good story, even if it's made up, it can be super convincing.
Exactly. Especially if it taps into something we're already insecure about.
So it really comes down to like being a smart consumer. You can't just believe everything you see online.
You got to be skeptical, you got to do your research. Critical thinking is like the most important skill you can have online these days.
Totally agree. Okay, and last but not least, this research, it brings up another reason for fabrication. And it's a bit more, well, emotional. It talks about how people sometimes exaggerate or even make up stories to get sympathy or validation.
That's a really interesting point. It's not always about being malicious, right?
Right. Sometimes it's just about wanting to connect with others, to feel seen and heard, especially because the internet can be a lonely place.
It's that human need for connection. And sometimes, people might embellish things to get that empathy and support.
It's tough, though, because, well, I get why someone might do that. False narratives can be harmful, too.
Oh, absolutely. Especially when it comes to sensitive topics. It's a delicate balance between having compassion and also being like discerning.
So, taking all this in, it seems like there's not one simple answer to why people fabricate online.
It's a mix of things, right?
Yeah, it's about individual motivations.
Mhm.
It's about how these platforms are designed. It's about how we as consumers react to information.
It's all connected. And that's why it's so important to talk about it.
Totally. And that brings us to our final thought for everyone listening.
Yeah.
How can we be more careful, more aware of all this when we're online? What tools can we use to, like, tell fact from fiction, to make sure we're not being tricked by these made-up stories?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's a challenge for all of us.
It is. But it's a challenge worth tackling. So keep thinking about it, keep questioning things. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it sparked some, interesting thoughts.
Absolutely. And remember, stay curious out there.
And catch you next time.
See ya.